World Sentinel, World Watch TV, Episode 3, Special Crisis Edition, Day 30. The Iran War, from Assassination to the Edge. A complete account of the first month. Deep research script. 10,000 words, 30-minute video. All research current as of March 30th, 2026. Day 30 of the war. Sources: Wikipedia, Al Jazeera, CNN, NPR, BBC, Times of Israel. Critical threats: ACLED, World Economic Forum, Dallas Federal Reserve, Bloomberg. World Sentinel, World Watch TV, Dragon Sea. All rights reserved. Episode 3. Iran. War Day 30. Deep research script. March 30, 2026. 30 days ago, the world changed. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, and in 15 hours, they killed the supreme leader of Iran, dismantled Iran's air defenses, decapitated the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and ignited the most dangerous regional war the Middle East has seen in half a century. Today is Day 30. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil flows, every single day is effectively closed. Oil prices have surged by more than 40%. Thousands are dead. Millions are displaced. The Houthis of Yemen have just entered the war. Israel is pushing deep into Lebanon. Iran has rejected America's ceasefire plan, and somewhere between negotiation and catastrophe, the world is holding its breath. This is World Sentinel, World Watch TV. Episode 3. The Iran War. Day 30. Everything you need to understand. Told honestly. Told completely. To understand Day 30, you must understand what happened long before February 28. Because this war did not begin with a single decision. It was the product of decades of escalating pressure, failed diplomacy, and a catastrophic miscalculation. Or perhaps a deliberate gamble that changed everything. For more than 2 decades, the central tension between Iran and the West has been Iran's nuclear program. In 2015, the Obama administration negotiated the JCPOA, which limited Iran's uranium enrichment in exchange for sanctions relief. In 2018, President Trump withdrew from the agreement and reimposed maximum pressure sanctions. Iran responded by gradually expanding its nuclear activities, enriching uranium to ever higher levels. By early 2026, Iran was assessed to be within weeks of producing enough enriched uranium for a nuclear weapon, though not yet one it could deliver on a missile. This drove the sense of urgency in both Washington and Tel Aviv. In January 2026, 2 events transformed the situation. First, Iranian security forces killed tens of thousands of protesters during the country's largest anti-government demonstrations since the 1979 revolution. Second, U.S. and Iranian negotiators met for indirect nuclear talks in Oman's capital Muscat in early February. Talks that seemed to be producing genuine results. On February 27, 2026, 1 day before the strikes, Omani Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi announced that a breakthrough had been reached. Iran had agreed to never stockpile enriched uranium and to full IAEA verification. Peace was, he said, within reach. Talks were expected to resume on March 2nd. On the very day Iran agreed to nuclear limitations in Oman, the United States and Israel had already decided to strike. The strikes came during active negotiations, not despite them. What happened next defied all diplomatic logic and has become the central grievance that makes Iran's negotiating position so rigid. While peace talks were active, while Iranian negotiators were still communicating with Omani mediators, U.S. B-2 stealth bombers, F-22 Raptors, and Israeli F-35Is were already airborne. The intelligence was too good to ignore, according to U.S. officials. A full meeting of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, including Supreme Leader Khamenei himself, had been confirmed for Saturday morning, February 28. The window was narrow. The decision was made to accelerate. At 9:45 in the morning, Tehran time, the world changed. The United States called it Operation Epic Fury. Israel called its component Operation Roaring Lion. Neither name was accidental. Both were designed to send a message. This was not a limited strike. This was a statement of overwhelming, total intent. In the first 15 hours of February 28, 2026, 09:45, IRST. First strikes on Tehran. B-2 bombers and F-35Is strike the compound, where Khamenei's Security Council is meeting. Two massive explosions. Smoke visible from miles across Tehran. 1100. IRST. Khamenei confirmed dead. Israeli intelligence identifies the body. 86 years old. Supreme leader since 1989. 37 years of theocratic rule ended in minutes. 11:30 IRST. IRGC leadership decapitated. IRGC Commander Mohammad Pakpour, Defense Minister Amir Nasirzadeh, Senior Advisor Ali Shamkhani, Chief of Staff Mohammad Bagheri, all killed. 1200 IRST. Iran retaliates immediately. Within 1 hour of the first strikes, before the smoke had cleared, Iranian drones and ballistic missiles are airborne. 14 U.S. military bases across Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, and UAE targeted simultaneously. 02:30 Eastern Time. Trump confirms the operation. 8 minutes on Truth Social. One of the most evil people in history. Strikes to continue all week. Precision bombing on a massive scale, without interruption. Iran's air defense systems across western and central Iran were dismantled within hours. Ballistic missile production facilities were struck. The IRGC's intelligence headquarters was destroyed. Iran's naval corvette Jamaran was sunk at Chabahar. Iran closed its airspace entirely. But Iran's response was immediate and chillingly disciplined. Even with its top commanders dead, the IRGC executed its pre-planned contingency operations with terrifying efficiency. This was not improvisation. This was a military that had anticipated this moment and prepared for it in detail. Dubai International Airport, the world's busiest international hub, shut down indefinitely. Hamad International in Qatar went dark. More than 3,400 flights canceled in a single day, stranding tens of thousands of travelers. The Strait of Hormuz fell into de facto closure as insurance companies and shipping operators withdrew from the corridor. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. It connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman. Through it, every single day flows approximately 20% of the world's entire oil supply. Every major oil producer in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar depends on the strait to reach global markets. On March 2nd, an IRGC official confirmed officially the strait was closed. Any vessel attempting transit would be targeted. Within days, commercial shipping had effectively ceased. War risk insurance premiums made crossing economically impossible for most operators. By the end of the first week, satellite tracking showed no tankers broadcasting identification signals in the strait. That silence was its own announcement of catastrophe. 20 million barrels of oil per day. 20% of global supply. 84% of Hormuz crude destined for Asian markets. Japan, 90% oil dependence on the Middle East. South Korea, 70% crude from the Middle East, 95% through Hormuz. The United States, working with the International Energy Agency, announced a record release of 400 million barrels from strategic reserves, the largest release in history. The U.S. also temporarily lifted sanctions on some Russian and Iranian oil. Saudi Arabia and the UAE rush to reroute oil through pipelines that bypass the strait. But these alternatives have strict capacity limits. The pipeline throughput from Saudi Arabia's east-west route and the UAE's Fujairah route cannot offset a full closure, and time is running out. Oil prices, which stood at approximately $70 per barrel before the war, spiked to nearly $120 in the first week, then eased to around $100, still 40% above pre-war levels. Goldman Sachs warned that if the strait remained closed through mid-April, prices could reach $150 or beyond. Bloomberg's analysts raised the specter of $200 per barrel in an extreme scenario. The Dallas Federal Reserve Bank published a stark analysis of closure of the strait, removing close to 20% of global oil supplies, is expected to raise oil prices to $98 per barrel and lower global real GDP growth by an annualized 2.9 percentage points in the second quarter of 2026. If the closure extends, those numbers worsen dramatically. For viewers in South Korea and Japan, this section is written specifically for you, because while the world's cameras are pointed at Tehran and Beirut, the front line that may matter most to your daily life is being fought, not with missiles, but with energy prices, supply chains, and strategic anxiety. South Korea, a $68 billion emergency. South Korea imports approximately 70% of its crude oil from the Middle East and routes more than 95% of that through the Strait of Hormuz. The moment the strait closed, South Korea was in crisis. Emergency economic protocols were activated within days. A 100 trillion won market stabilization program, approximately $68 billion, was immediately deployed. South Korea restricted naphtha exports for 5 months to prioritize domestic energy security. South Korea also faces a secondary strategic anxiety. As the United States redirects military assets toward the Middle East, the Korean peninsula becomes, in relative terms, slightly less covered. Every Korean defense planner is watching U.S. Gulf deployments with quiet, careful concern. Japan, 90% exposure. Japan's vulnerability is even more acute. Japan relies on the Middle East for approximately 90% of its crude oil imports, the vast majority transiting the strait. Japan activated emergency response protocols immediately. The government is monitoring LNG supply chains with particular anxiety, following the March 18 strike on Qatar's Ras Laffan LNG complex, which reduced production by 17%, with damage assessed to require 3 to 5 years to fully repair. Asian LNG spot prices have surged 140%. Japan also faces the same unsettling strategic question. Korea is asking if the United States struck Iran during active diplomatic negotiations. What does that signal about the reliability of American security guarantees? For a nation that depends on the U.S. security umbrella against a nuclear-armed North Korea, this question is not rhetorical. North Korea. The unspoken lesson. Pyongyang has not issued a formal statement. It has not needed to. The lesson of February 28 has been absorbed in Pyongyang as clearly as any diplomatic communication. Kim Jong-un's core strategic calculation has always been that nuclear weapons are the ultimate insurance against regime change, precisely because Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi gave up their programs and were eliminated. Khamenei was killed while his nuclear program was being actively constrained in negotiations. North Korea will never forget this. Its weapons program is, more than ever, entirely non-negotiable. China, strategic reserves, and strategic patience. China enters this crisis from a stronger position than its neighbors. It holds approximately 1.4 billion barrels in strategic reserves. Iranian and Chinese-flagged vessels continue to transit the strait, as Iran has permitted yuan-denominated cargo to pass. But China is watching something far more important than oil prices. It is watching the limits of American diplomatic reliability. The killing of Khamenei during active negotiations has handed China a powerful argument. that no country can fully trust American commitments, that will be deployed in every geopolitical conversation for years to come. By day 26 of the war, something unexpected began to happen. The United States, under mounting economic pressure, from surging oil prices and approaching midterm elections, began making diplomatic overtures. President Trump simultaneously conducted airstrikes and claimed to be negotiating, presenting a contradictory picture to the world. But beneath the noise, something real was occurring. The Pakistan Channel. Pakistan emerged as the unlikely mediator between the two sides. Pakistani Army Commander Asim Munir became what sources described as the key interlocutor between Washington and Tehran. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar publicly confirmed his country was relaying messages between the US and Iran. On day 29, Iran agreed to allow 20 Pakistani-flagged vessels to transit the strait, 2 ships per day, a small but symbolically significant gesture, suggesting Tehran was not entirely closed to communication. Foreign ministers from Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt gathered in Islamabad on March 29 for 2 days of diplomatic discussions. The United States and Iran were not directly present, but both were listening through intermediaries. America's 15 points. On March 24, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner presented Pakistan with a 15-point peace proposal to transmit to Iran. The key demands Iran must dismantle its nuclear program entirely, end all uranium enrichment, hand over its entire enriched uranium stockpile, grant full IAEA access to all nuclear facilities, limit its ballistic missile program, cease all support for the axis of resistance, meaning Hezbollah, the Houthis, and the Iraqi militias, recognize Israel's right to exist, and ensure freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. Trump claimed Iran was negotiating. Iran denied any negotiations were taking place. Foreign Minister Arachi acknowledged only an exchange of messages via mediators, and emphasized this was emphatically not the same as talks. Iran's military mocked the U.S. openly. Have your internal conflicts reached the point of you negotiating with yourselves? Iran's 5 conditions. Iran's response, a 5-point counter-proposal that Washington called unacceptable. Iran demanded a complete end to all aggression. Concrete guarantees preventing any future war against Iran. Comprehensive payment of war reparations. A comprehensive end to hostilities across all fronts, explicitly including Lebanon. And the most explosive demand of all, Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. That last demand deserves examination. The strait runs through waters considered international under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Iran claiming sovereignty over its navigation is not a negotiating position. It is a claimed transformation of the global energy order. The United States will never accept it, which is precisely why Iran put it on the table, as a signal that Tehran is not negotiating from desperation. Araguchi's clearest statement. We do not want a ceasefire. We want the war to end in a way that it does not repeat, on our own terms. The damages to the people of Iran must also be compensated. Iran is waging a different war from America's military campaign. Iran is waging a war of time, of economic attrition, and of international legitimacy. Every day the strait remains closed. Economic pressure on the United States intensifies. Every day the war continues. Iran's narrative of victimhood, a sovereign nation struck during peace negotiations, gains more credibility internationally. The United States is fighting with bombs. Iran is fighting with patience. One of the most dangerous aspects of this conflict is how rapidly it has expanded beyond Iran's borders. What began as a bilateral US-Israeli strike on Iran has become a regional war, spanning 6 countries and threatening to engulf several more. On March 2nd, just 48 hours after the first strikes, Hezbollah launched its first missile and drone attacks against northern Israel since the November 2024 ceasefire. The IDF declared it an act of war and immediately authorized a ground operation into southern Lebanon, As of day 29, at least 1,189 people have been killed in Lebanon in Israeli strikes, including 124 children, 51 healthcare workers, and 3 journalists killed in a single strike. 700,000 Lebanese have been displaced, 20% of the entire country's population. Israel is advancing toward and beyond the Litani River, describing its goal as establishing a security buffer on the Gaza model. In a remarkable development, Lebanon's own government turned against Hezbollah. The Council of Ministers announced a total ban on Hezbollah's military activities and demanded the group surrender its weapons to the state. Lebanon expelled the Iranian ambassador. These are extraordinary steps for a government long paralyzed by Hezbollah's power. But Israel has made clear that words alone are insufficient. Iran has made its position explicit. No ceasefire in Iran, without a simultaneous ceasefire in Lebanon. This condition links the two wars into a single diplomatic knot. Iraq did not choose this war. At least 99 people have been killed on Iraqi soil as a result of it. The country hosts both a U.S. military presence and powerful Iran-backed militias, the Popular Mobilization Forces that are officially part of the Iraqi armed forces, but operate with considerable independence. These militias have been attacking U.S. bases. The U.S. has been striking back. A U.S. strike on Habaniya military base killed 7 Iraqi soldiers, prompting Baghdad to formally summon the U.S. Embassy's chargé d'affaires in protest. The Kurdistan region's presidential residence was attacked. Iraq is being torn between its two most important relationships simultaneously. The Royal Air Force Station at Akrotiri in Cyprus, a British sovereign base, and a NATO-adjacent facility was struck by a drone. Greece immediately announced the deployment of frigates and F-16s to Cyprus. An IRGC general stated Iran planned to strike Cyprus with such intensity that the Americans will be forced to leave. When Iran begins threatening territory adjacent to a NATO country, the conflict has entered genuinely new and dangerous territory. On March 28th, day 29, the Houthis of Yemen entered the conflict. Their first strikes ballistic missiles and drones targeting Israel's southern Red Sea port city of Eilat. The attacks were intercepted, but the Houthis' pledge was unambiguous. They would continue fighting in support of resistance fronts in Palestine, Lebanon, Iraq, and Iran. The Houthis' entry matters for one reason. Above all others, the Bab al-Mandeb Strait. This is the narrow waterway between Yemen and the Horn of Africa, through which ships pass between the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, the route to the Suez Canal and Europe. If the Houthis block the Bab al-Mandeb simultaneously with Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz, both of the world's most critical maritime choke points close at the same time. The resulting disruption to global oil, gas, food, and trade flows would be beyond anything markets have yet modeled. Behind the geopolitics, behind the oil prices, behind the diplomatic communications, there are human lives. Let us be precise about what has been lost in 30 days. These are not statistics. They are families. They are children who did not return home. They are healthcare workers killed while treating the wounded. They are journalists killed while reporting the truth. They are ordinary people who did not choose this war and cannot stop it. And the numbers we have are only the numbers we can confirm. In a war where Iran has imposed internet blackouts, where hospitals are overwhelmed, where independent reporting is impossible in many areas, the true human cost of 30 days is almost certainly significantly higher than any official count can capture. The economic consequences of the Iran war are being felt on every continent. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz has triggered a cascade of disruptions that are reshaping commodity markets, threatening food security, and challenging the monetary policy of every major central bank. Brent crude surged from approximately $70 per barrel before the war to nearly $100, and $20 within days, a surge of more than 40%. As some diplomatic optimism emerged, Prices eased to around $100, but analysts have modeled deeply concerning scenarios at $170 per barrel. The impact on Eurozone inflation roughly doubles a stagflationary shock that could shift global central bank policy. Some Wall Street analysts have raised the specter of $200 per barrel if the strait remains closed beyond mid-April. Europe entered this crisis with gas storage at just 30% capacity following a harsh winter, the lowest levels since 2021. Qatar's Ras Laffan LNG complex, which supplies significant quantities to Europe, was struck on March 18th. Dutch TTF gas benchmarks have nearly doubled to over 60 euros per megawatt hour. The European Central Bank postponed its planned rate reductions on March 19th. UK inflation is expected to breach 5% in 2026. Chemical and steel manufacturers across the EU have imposed surcharges of up to 30% to offset surging energy costs. Less visible than oil, but potentially more damaging to the rest. World's most vulnerable populations. The Gulf region produces nearly half of the world's urea and 30% of its ammonia. 1/3 of global fertilizer trade passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Urea prices have already increased 50% since the war began. For Brazil, which supplies 60% of the world's soybeans, a sustained shortage threatens global food prices. Gulf food imports have been disrupted by 70%. With consumer price spikes of 40 to 1, 120% already reported across Gulf states. Perhaps the most troubling financial development has been the emergence of insider trading allegations. A Financial Times investigation found that $580 million in bets on falling oil prices were placed just 15 minutes before Trump posted on Truth Social about postponing strikes on Iranian power plants, a post that caused oil prices to fall immediately. Calls for investigation have intensified from multiple quarters. The timing and scale of those trades strain any innocent explanation. Part 9. How the world responded. The world's reaction to Operation Epic Fury exposed fractures in the international order that had been widening for years and cracked open completely on February 28th. Russia and China. Strategic embarrassment. Putin called Khamenei's killing a cynical murder and requested an emergency IAEA meeting. China's Wang Yi called the attack unacceptable and condemned the incitement of regime change. Both Moscow and Beijing face a moment of profound strategic embarrassment. Iran was their most significant Middle Eastern partner. Their military reassurances to Tehran proved hollow. Their ability to constrain American unilateralism was demonstrated to be non-existent. Russia and China will spend years processing the implications of this exposure and drawing their own conclusions about what it means for their own security. Europe divided and struggling. Germany's President Steinmeier called the killing a politically disastrous mistake and a violation of international law. France's Macron called an emergency UN Security Council session. Italy blamed Iran for provoking the confrontation. European Commission President von der Leyen issued a statement backing regime change, a dramatic departure from decades of EU policy favoring negotiated engagement. A joint statement from France, Canada, Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom expressed grave concern about Lebanon and called for immediate de-escalation. The Muslim world volcanic reaction. In Pakistan, 9 people were killed as demonstrators approached the U.S. consulate in Karachi. In Baghdad, crowds attempted to breach the U.S. embassy. Iraqi Shiite militias vowed retaliation. Turkey condemned Israeli operations in Lebanon as genocidal collective punishment. Hezbollah Secretary General Naim Qassem rejected all negotiations, describing resistance as a national responsibility. Iran, inside its own borders, saw both massive state-organized mourning demonstrations and, in quieter neighborhoods before the internet was cut, videos of citizens celebrating, dancing, expressing relief. The country Khamenei ruled for 37 years was, it turned out, deeply divided about his legacy. Part 10. Day 30. Where we stand right now. Today is March 30th, 2026. Day 30 of the Iran War. Here is exactly where things stand. Militarily, U.S. and Israeli strikes continue daily on Iran, targeting weapons factories, missile development centers, nuclear facilities, and IRGC infrastructure. Israel has struck yellowcake production near Yazd and a heavy water reactor near Arak. Iran continues launching missile barrages at Israel and Gulf Arab neighbors. The 82nd Airborne is deploying 1,000 paratroopers to join the USS. Tripoli's 3,500 Marines already on station. Israel is advancing further into Lebanon, having killed approximately 800 Hezbollah operatives, including hundreds of the elite Radwan force. The Houthis are now in the war from Yemen. U.S. and Iranian-backed forces continue clashing across Iraq. Diplomatically, Iran has rejected the U.S. 15-point peace plan as maximalist and unreasonable. Iran has issued its own 5-point counterproposal, including war reparations and sovereignty over the strait, which the U.S. considers entirely unacceptable. Pakistan is mediating. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt are engaged diplomatically. Vice President Vance has stated, "The war will continue a little while longer." Trump has paused the threat to strike Iranian power plants until April 6th. Iran denies any talks are taking place. The gap between American optimism about a deal and Iranian intransigence is dangerous and measured in bombs. Economically, oil at $100 per barrel. Goldman Sachs warning of 30% recession risk over the next 12 months. European energy crisis deepening with the second quarter. Refill season approaching. Fertilizer prices up 50%. Food security deteriorating across the Gulf and vulnerable nations. The window for preventing catastrophic economic damage is closing rapidly. Oil industry executives broadly agree, if the strait is not reopened by mid-April, global economic damage escalates sharply and becomes significantly harder to reverse. Part 11. 3 scenarios. What happens next? Scenario 1. Negotiated resolution. Estimated probability 25 to 30%. Pakistan brokers indirect talks in Islamabad. Iran agrees to a temporary ceasefire on a modified framework. Not the U.S. 15 points, but a compromise that gives Iran face-saving concessions on reparations and security guarantees, while addressing Washington's core demands on nuclear enrichment and the strait. The Houthis stand down. Lebanon enters a new ceasefire. Oil prices fall rapidly. Global markets recover. This scenario requires both sides to accept less than their stated demands, and requires Iran to trust a partner that struck it twice during diplomatic talks under the Trump administration. The trust deficit is enormous, but the economic pressure on the United States, as the 2026 midterm elections approach, creates genuine incentive for resolution. This is possible. It is not yet probable. Scenario 2. Extended attrition. Estimated probability 45 to 50%. The war continues for another 30 to 60 days. Iran's military capacity is degraded, but never destroyed. The strait remains partially closed, not fully blockaded, but commercially unusable for most operators. Oil prices remain between $80 and $120, inflicting sustained economic pain. Europe experiences significant energy disruption, but manages without catastrophic collapse. Lebanon is devastated. Iraq is destabilized, eventually through exhaustion, economic pressure, or a back channel. Breakthrough a ceasefire is arranged that both sides present as victory. Iran retains its government structure, significantly weakened. The nuclear program is damaged, but not eliminated. The axis of resistance is severely reduced, but not destroyed. The region lives with an unstable frozen conflict for years. This is the most likely path. Scenario 3. Catastrophic escalation. Estimated probability 20 to 25%. IRGC hardliners prevail. The Strait of Hormuz is formally mined. The Houthis block the Bab el-Mandeb. Both choke points close simultaneously. Oil surges past $150 toward $200. U.S. naval forces engage in direct combat with Iranian forces in the Gulf. Iran activates every proxy simultaneously. One or more major U.S. naval assets suffers a catastrophic strike. Congressional pressure for formal war powers oversight erupts. Russia and China move to openly support Iran materially and diplomatically. Iran's parliament votes to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The world enters a period of genuine systemic risk that no existing model can fully predict or contain. Outrow World Sentinel. Editorial perspective. 30 days ago, the Middle East of February 27, 2026, ceased to exist. A theocratic state that had defined regional power dynamics for 37 years was struck at its apex. Whether what follows is transformation or chaos, or both, remains genuinely unknowable. From where we stand today, what World Sentinel can tell you with confidence after 30 days of careful, independent observation is this. First, the United States and Israel achieved their immediate military objectives. Khamenei is dead. The IRGC is decapitated. Iran's military infrastructure is severely damaged. The nuclear program has been significantly disrupted. These are facts. Second, Iran has not collapsed. Its institutional resilience has surprised many analysts. The Transition Council is functioning. The IRGC continues to operate. Iran's proxy network is battered, but not broken. Military strikes alone cannot end a nation's will to resist. Third, the economic time bomb is real and ticking loudly. Every day, the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. Is a day of irreversible economic damage being done to economies worldwide, allied and enemy alike. America's greatest strategic pressure is not its bombs. It is the calendar. Fourth, the world's order has shifted in ways that will take years to fully understand. From Tokyo to Seoul, from Beijing to Berlin, from Islamabad to Brasilia, nations are recalibrating their assumptions about American power, American reliability, and the rules of international behavior. Those recalibrations will have consequences we cannot yet predict. And fifth, in the rubble of Tehran, in the hospitals of Beirut, in the displacement camps of Lebanon, in the oil-starved ports of Asia, and in the rising grocery prices of ordinary families on every continent, there are human beings, people who did not choose this war, who cannot stop it, and who will carry its consequences for the rest of their lives. World Sentinel will be here every week as this story continues to unfold. We will tell you what is true. We will tell you what is uncertain. We will tell you what matters to you, wherever in this world you are watching from. That is our commitment. That is who we are. This has been World Sentinel, World Watch TV. Episode 3, The Iran War. Day 30. Stay informed, stay watchful, and wherever you are in this world, stay safe. Research sources. All information current as of 0900 AEST, March 30th, 2026. Day 30 of the Iran War. Wikipedia. 2026 Iran War. 2026 Lebanon War. 2026 Strait of Hormuz crisis. Economic impact of the 2026 Iran War. Al Jazeera, CNN, NPR, BBC, Times of Israel. Critical threats. ISW CTP, ACLED, Middle East Special Issue. March 2026. World Economic Forum, Dallas. Federal Reserve Bank Research. Bloomberg Graphics. Washington Post. Stimson Center. Congress. GovCRS Report. Virginia Tech Economic Analysis. Kapler Commodity Intelligence.